to be honest with you, the first performance of Christus this last Friday was absolutely amazing. It completely exceeded my expectations. You know, you spend 3 years working on a piece of music, and it's difficult to know how it's going to be received or interpreted. And part of being a composer, a musician, is for the most part, it's just, the music is just black notes on a page. I mean, it's nothing until it gets performed. So unless you get the right performers involved, performers can make or break a performance. And I think that I was absolutely blessed to be able to work with the choral artist of Fort Worth and Ryan Chatterton, the music director, and their interpretation of the piece far exceeded what I could have ever imagined for the piece. So I would say it was very successful. And from a technical perspective, there's always things that can be better, and we're actually working on talking about that with the directors and with the soloists. And but like I said, with any performance, and we're talking about an hour-long piece of music, 9 movements. I mean, how do you put all of that together in a single, for a world premiere? In fact, we had never actually run the piece all the way through before that performance. And so I would say that it was 98% awesome. And 2% needs to be worked on. I'd say that's pretty good odds, 98%. So yeah, there's definitely some things we'll work on. Well, first of all, when I wrote the piece, I actually had certain people in mind as I wrote the piece. And in fact, Jeff Schneider, since I've been at University of North Texas since 2010, I mean, he definitely jumped to the top of the list as a baritone I want, soloist. Just a warmth about his voice that really reflected what I was trying to go for in the writing. And then the other soloist I had in mind was Julia Bushkova, obviously, as the violinist, mainly because of the violin writing that I had in the piece. There's a certain tone that I wanted. And of course, I went to some violin concerts, I looked at a bunch of students, but in the end, I knew I needed that sound. And I was thrilled and actually blown away that these soloists wanted to be a part of the project. In fact, didn't just want to be a part of the project, but they were emphatically enthusiastic about being a part of the project. And that really invigorated me and gave me strength. So, and as you'll see when we release the video of the piece, you'll hear their performances and you'll see why I chose them. Of course, Bill and Jennifer and Carol were all people that came along later in the process for the same reason. I wanted that color, that tone. So that's why I chose them. As a keyboard instrument, the organ is so unique. Every organ is so different. In fact, we're doing the concert again this next Sunday at Christ the King Catholic Church in Dallas, and that organ is completely different. I was there practicing late last night, and it's electric. I mean, the organ has moments that are just as exquisite, if not more so, than First Presbyterian Church's organ. And then there's moments where I'm like, oh, I really want that sound from First Presbyterian Church. And so yeah, each organ is different. But yeah, you know, when I wanted to perform the piece, I was actually more looking at the space. And First Presbyterian space has a really good acoustic. It's not too live and it's not dead. It's kind of right in between. And so I was more looking at the space. And in fact, an organ is just as much the room, right? The room is kind of the sounding board for an organ. Or soundboard, not sounding board, but a soundboard for the organ. So I was more looking at the space, and then I figured I'd put up with whatever organ was in the space. Most definitely. In fact, as you heard the piece, you probably heard moments where you heard strings or a French horn. Like every time I play the piece, I'm thinking, oh, that's my horn. I can hear the horn. That's the horn speaking, right? Or I can hear the timpani rolls. And most definitely, in fact, my initial conception of the piece, again, was an organ concerto, was to orchestrate it, was to perform the orchestral version. Of course, trying to get an hour-long piece performed with a full orchestra is impossible. So as an organist, a virtuoso organist, I figured I'll finish the chamber version first, do that, and then maybe hopefully generate some funding that we can raise to maybe get an orchestral version performed. So yes, most definitely I will be orchestrating it someday. And the answer to that question actually would probably be a little bit of both, right? I mean, when you're writing a 9-movement piece that's an hour long, you got a plan. Like, you can't just like start writing a 9-movement piece. Like, you got to come up with some sort of a plan. And so when I initially started writing Christus, I actually wanted it didn't have the title Christus, and I was thinking more about writing an organ concerto that had choir involved, which I thought was kind of a bold experimental thing. And eventually, when I started looking at texts, it really evolved into the piece that it became. And then once I chose the text, so I remember in the early stages of the process, I literally read everything I could about Christ and texts that had to do with his hands being outstretched still. So I had all sorts of biblical texts, and ultimately I settled on combining elements from the Catholic Mass and the Requiem Mass with biblical texts and poetry by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And that was ultimately kind of where I went with the text. And once I chose the text, then yes, the text completely dictated a lot of what I did. And I chose really a text that really invigorated my creativity within the composition. Well, Christus, interestingly enough, was the foundation of the piece was 2 pillar movements. It was the third movement, the Pia Jesu, and this 8th movement, the O Deus Ego Mote, which were written previously. So I kind of had these 2 pillar movements, and then I filled in 7 other movements around it. And so if you were to say what was the first theme I developed that was really meaningful, it would be the Amen at the end of the O Deus Ego Mote. I specifically knew that I wanted that Amen that is spoken by a human being to represent the prayer of Christ in the first movement, pleading to the Lord for mercy. I felt like that was a really important thing. But really the first motive that I really can remember is this dee, 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 dee. It's kind of this, it's minor second, major third, major second. It's this dee, 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 dee. And that really formed a huge basis of the first movement, and then obviously the fourth movement, Glorificamos te. And so I took that, and I really love that color. If you play it together, it's got a really unique color and palette to it that I really loved it. So yeah, I could say that was my first motif or color that I came up with the piece would be that one. Well, one of the things you get trained is in a composition department at a university, for example, is there's a huge push towards experimentation, right? It's about creating something new that's never been done. Well, in my mind, that's ominous. It's too much pressure. There's so much that's been done, and how do you create something new when you don't even have time in your life to study everything that everybody's done? So in my mind, it's look at our world of music. I mean, we have so much from the 1300s when we have our first manuscripts, right, until now. We have Renaissance music. We have Baroque counterpoint. We've got Romanticism, and it's all of its emotional depth of glory, right? We've got 20th century Impressionism and Idealism, and we've got modern experimental techniques, and we've got all of this. So why not, like a poet does, why not be witty? Why not take a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and let's combine them? And all of a sudden we're saying something persuasive. What if we're a good craftsman? What if we build a beautiful piece? We hammer in a nice piece of wood, and we come up with this piece that communicates something new and persuasive. And all of a sudden, you haven't done anything new, but you've done something new. And that's power. And that's my goal as composer, is not to create something that's really weird and out there, but something that is very well crafted and persuasive and moving and can take somebody who knows tons about music and somebody who knows nothing about music, put them in the same room and give them a similar experience. And so my music, there's depth. There's a lot of layers of depth. It's not superficial. It's not just notes on a page. And yet sometimes it sounds like Vivaldi, then other times it sounds like Messiaen. Sometimes it sounds really modern. But all of that's together to to persuade, and it's exciting and it's so much fun. And with Christus, I had fun. My biggest thing was I wanted to go back in time. I wanted to pretend like I was in 1610 Italy, and I just heard Monteverdi's Vespers, and I wanted to use that as a starting point. So that was my experiment. Like I was like, well, what if I lived in 1610 Italy, and I wrote this whole new piece that was based on Monteverdi's Vespers, and in that context, this piece is going to be bold. It's going to be something that nobody's ever heard before. So can I take the audience on a journey with me? Can they come back to 1610 with me? And then if they come back to 1610 with me, if I can somehow put them in that room, all of a sudden the music that they just heard is something they've never heard before. It's fresh, it's timeless, it's something really profound. They forget about everything else, and for that moment, they went on a musical journey. That's what I try to do with this piece. One of the things that got me excited about composition is, as an organist, as somebody who performs regularly, one of the things I thought about several years ago was how to separate myself from everybody else. And when I look back at the legacy of musicians, the world is full. We study people who are brilliant performers and composers. And so I want to incorporate composition into my musical studies and my musical exploration and how I presented myself. And all of the above is how I compose. Right? A lot of my composition is informed by my playing at the piano or at the organ. But I also create systems, which is you have to do as a composer, where if you create little systems, not algorithmic per se, but systems that generate creative material, it can really help. And then once you create the system, then you improvise within that system to make beautiful music. And so Christus, for example, is full of systems. It's full of improvisation. But I also, when I compose, I experiment. So as a performer, it's easy to do this, right? But I don't want to do this. That's easy for me. So what if I do this? And that I have to go practice that, and that becomes fun. I use composition as a way to increase my technique and try new things at the keyboard, and that's fun too. No, yes, I definitely use the computer. So for example, I'll be at the keyboard and I'll come up with this melody, or I'll come up with this accompanimental idea, and I'll sketch it out. I'll say, this is kind of where I want the harmonies to go. I'll kind of like put the harmony there, but then maybe the texture, I kind of want the harmony to be prolongated by this. And that I'll kind of work at. I'm dancing, my finger's dancing. That I will work out at the computer. I'll kind of sit down, I'll kind of be like, oh, I'll put this note here and this note here, and kind of work things out, and I'll listen to it, I'll be like, yeah, I don't really like that. And then when I like on the computer, I print it out, I go to the keyboard, and I play it and see how it sounds actually acoustically, and then I usually fix things after that, because usually the computer doesn't sound very good. Publishers are finicky, right? Because I've actually been approached by one publisher in particular that wanted to publish all of my music for the rest of my life, which I was honored. However, committing all of my music for the rest of my life greatly inhibited me. And, for example, well, I like being self-published because I own the complete copyright. So if I want to change something, I can do so at any time. I can control pricing. And when I sell music, I get more of the profits. However, I understand that if I was with a major publisher, my name would get out there quicker. I get that. But I have a friend who's published with Oxford University Press, which is a major publisher. And in the last 6 years, he hasn't sold anything because they don't promote his music. And last year alone, I made, several $1,000s. And mostly from, local people. People who know me all over the country who are performing my music and buying it. And I'm not with a major publisher. So I kind of like being self-published. I have full license over how I present myself, an artistic vision and whatnot. I love it. I actually love being self-published. So people don't look down on it as much as if the music speaks for itself, people don't look down on it anymore. They love the music. They don't care if you're with Oxford or if you're with now the one publisher I'd want to get published with would be like Baron Writer. I really like the way they present their scores, but I'm too little for them, so. This is a very, very loaded question, right? And I love it. It's hard to answer this question because I appreciate all forms of music. Even in the pop spectrum, right? There's people that are pushing boundaries there as well. But modern music, in the sense of like abstractism and creating music, experimental modern music and whatnot. I appreciate what people are doing, and it informs my own composition as well. I do feel like people don't expect to be. How do I say this? Are we passionate about the music that we're making? Maybe that's a better way to go. Do I love the music that I'm creating? And I think as a composer, if I love what I'm doing, my hope is that other people will start to love what I'm doing as well. I don't know. I think we maybe we need to be more passionate about what we're doing, and have we lost a little sight of the listener, of the performer, of the people who participate in the music making process? It's not about me as a composer. It's the people who perform, it's the people who listen, and all of us are a part of this symbiotic relationship of the music experience. And I think we have to respect that. And if we don't, then maybe that's why it falls flat, right? Because somebody's getting left out. And many times, it's the listener. It's the person who's actually paying to support. Trying to compose every day is a little bit more difficult because it's hard to find time to compose every day. I wish I could. I think it's important to do so. But at the same time, it's nice to take a break too, and then come at it from a different angle. And it's nice to learn and do. Composition to me isn't just sitting down and writing music. It's reading books, it's studying, it's analyzing other people's music. And so even though I'm not composing every day, I'm constantly studying other people's music. I'm constantly analyzing. I'm constantly going to concerts and assimilating a world, an environment. And every once in a while you get something that inspires you, and you want to take that and create something of your own based on that. That's composition. Most definitely. I think without controversy, we don't have a profession, right? Controversy is really, really important. And so, yeah, we need critics. We need people to create a little bit of buzz that are either supportive or against it. And in fact, when I write music, I purposely put things in my music that are controversial, like performance-wise, or I leave things unclear, so people have to talk about it. And when people talk about it, then people write papers about it. And when people write papers about it, they want to invite you to come do a master class about it and to talk about. So I purposely leave, some of the backstories out. I leave, the performance elements a little bit vague so that people have to talk about it and raise questions. And I think that's healthy. I think having critics raise questions about a piece of music is really helpful. Yes, we need it. We don't support it anymore. Probably because they're always too positive. But I don't know how I would feel if somebody wrote something negative about Christus. I'd probably cry. So it's a good thing, but at the same time, I see why it's good to be positive too. So. I think my not rebuttal, but my response to that would be, I think everybody should compose. I feel like the nature of man, our purpose in life is to create life, to create something beautiful, right? Now, for many of us as performers, it's to create music through our fingertips, through our bow strokes, through blowing, to create. And I feel like composition is maybe another form of creativity. And I think everybody should do it. Is everybody good at it? No. But I would never want to stop encouraging anybody to be good at it. Can you teach somebody to compose? Yes, because people taught me to compose, right? People opened doors for me that gave me direction. They taught me how to use the computer. They taught me how to do invertible counterpoint or contrary motion in playing, or harmonic progressions or rhythms, how to use rhythms. And of course, you know, I was told where to go in different scores. You should go look at this Ligeti etude. You know, I think this is what you want, or knowing what composers were doing and how to analyze, and all those things need to be taught. I mean, I'm coming at composition from 12 years of musical education. Was I an amazing composer in the first year? No. I was writing little fugues in my first year of undergraduate studies. And what I'm doing now is definitely a compendium of years and years of training and hard work and trial and error and never giving up. Because it's hard. It's really, really hard to create. It's really hard to do it. Gosh, when I write music, my hope, beyond all hope, is that there's a place for every single person in there. That's impossible, right? We're all so different. But what if that's your goal as a composer, what if you found a way that no matter who you are, that you find a home, that you feel valued as someone who just partook in a music-making experience? Whether you are a genius at music and whether you know nothing. Can I reach both of those people? Because both of these people come in with opinions. They both come in with preconceived, I'm not going to like this piece because it sounds like this. But what if you can break them down? What if you can persuade them? What if through your essay, your compositional essay, they say, I have to engage with this. This is something special. Then you've done your job. That's my goal.